I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're talking to Barbara Jane Hannon. She is the author of a wonderful book. It is called Letters from World War II. It is a poignant account of her parents' experiences during the war. After their deaths, she discovered a box of letters, World War II documents, and a hidden scrapbook, which revealed a story her family had never known. Through these materials, Barbara pieced together her father's harrowing journey as a B-17 navigator, his capture by German forces, and the enduring love between her parents during their years apart. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put her in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing this amazing book. The links are below the interview. BJ, great to see you here today on Spotlight. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I enjoy being able to talk about my dad's story as much as I can because, as you said, I did not know, Logan, what he went through. I think, growing up, my sisters and I knew some things, stories. The most interesting thing we knew was that our family celebrated Jump Day every January 11th. My dad would come down from upstairs and look at us and say, "It's Jump Day. Let's have pancakes." What we knew was that about Jump Day as little kids is that our dad jumped out of an airplane with a parachute. We didn't know why it was on the plane. As we got older, we learned a few things, and we knew he was a navigator, not a pilot. He used to take us out into the backyard at night and point out the constellations and the stars. And he told us that he didn't fly planes, but the pilot didn't know where to go unless he told them. And he used the stars at night in the dark. So we knew he was a navigator, but my dad was not very different, I think, than other World War II vets who had a horrific experience, and they just never really talked about it. And as you said, I really didn't know the story until we found these letters and these documents, and my sisters and I were stunned. We just had no idea what he went through.
Yeah. There's so much we don't know about our parents' lives. To us, they're just mommy and daddy and, giving us food and shelter and taking us here and there. But our parents had lives, they had love stories, they had adventures, they jumped out of planes. And in your dad's case, he jumped out of planes. He was captured by the Germans during World War II, which sounds like a death sentence. And he's lived not so much to talk about it, but to leave behind this treasure trove of documents. So when you found this box, I mean, that in and of itself must have been such a profound experience.
I agree with you. We don't know much about our parents' lives. And then, all of a sudden you're a teenager and you care about your life,
Exactly.
not theirs. So when I found this box of letters, there were 84 letters from 1941 to 1945. But there were all these documents, these telegrams, medical records, flight records. There was a commendation from Winston Churchill signed by him to my dad. And I'm like, what? At that point, when I started this story, I had no idea where this prison camp was. I had no idea where he was in England. And I didn't know the timeline, how long he was there. And in this box, there were two things that really caught my attention immediately going through this box. One was there were all these German Reichsmarks, wartime German Reichsmarks that my dad had. But then there were these French francs, Logan, and I picked up a 10 franc note and I thought, what was my dad doing with French francs? And I Googled the French franc, and it was US military issue after the war. But the only people who got these francs from the US government they gave him French francs because they realized that if they gave him all kinds of US dollars, they'd sink the French economy. So, but the point was they were only issued to soldiers who were physically in France. And I thought, France? What was my dad doing in France? I called one of my sisters and said, did you ever hear Daddy ever mention he was in France? And she said, no, he was in this prison camp in Germany. And then he got on a boat and came home. What was my dad doing in France? And how did he get there?
Hmm.
And this prison camp that he was in northern Germany on the Baltic. And it, of course, became East Germany, and it was controlled by the Russians. And finding out how my dad got out of this prison camp in Germany, I went to the prison camp physically in Germany and met with the curator of the Museum of Stalag Luft 1. I was stunned by this massive rescue of my dad in France or in Germany and sneaked out of there under the noses of the Russians and flown to. It's a stunning story. And I thought, people don't know this story. You know, people know the story of Dunkirk. They know Stalag Luft 3, The Great Escape.
Right.
But the remarkable way these guys, 9,000 POWs, were rescued out of this prison camp is a stunning story. I
Yeah.
didn't know. I didn't
Amazing.
know. And, you know, I put the story together. I went to England to his air base, Ridgewell Air Base in England. I met the curator. I took two of his granddaughters with him who were unbelievably, the runways are still there. And to stand on the runway that my dad, you know, taxied down every day was stunning to me.
Mm. Yeah.
And I didn't really know the story of how his plane was shot down. I learned that whole story. I learned what it was like for him every day to get up in that plane, being shot at by German fighters and flak. And I was just stunned by what he went through. And I hadn't even read the letters yet. And then I started reading the letters. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is these letters that my parents sent to each other. And first of all, people don't write letters like that anymore.
Yeah.
But these letters that my parents wrote each other in England, in the prison camp, I had no idea my dad could write letters from prison camp. These letters, clearly, when you read my dad's letters in England, he was there for 5 months, and this was his 16th mission that he was shot down and captured. So he made it 15 missions. And I don't know if people know, but if you were an airman in late 1943, 44, you had about a 1 in 4 chance of making it 25 missions. My dad made it 15, but you read his letters and you clearly get a sense that he's getting more frightened. And he wrote this letter to my mother the night before he was shot down. And he wrote her and said, my darling Dorothy, it gets more difficult every day to get up in the plane because you don't know what's going to happen. Your life hangs suspended until you see the coast of England.
Hmm.
But I will do this job that I signed up for to the best of my ability for my crew, my squadron, and my country, no matter the outcome. I read that and I suddenly saw my dad differently. It's why I wrote the book. Just these stunning letters. And I think sometimes that in today's world, people get so angry about the smallest things. My parents, Logan, had reason to be upset with the
Hmm.
world. They were married for 2 months and my dad flew off, and my mother did not see him for 2 years. And not once in 84 letters is there any anger. Is there any whining? Why did this happen to us? Just these letters of support, hope, love to each other. And I'm sure that's what my dad kept him going. And I think I wrote the book. People maybe don't understand what it was like to be in this prison camp. My dad lost 45 pounds because they were not fed by the Germans. On his prisoner of war records, there are lists of punishments he received for insubordination, inciting a riot, one for digging tunnels. Good for my dad, you know.
Yeah.
And I I think people may not really realize what this generation went through.
Yeah.
And my parents just were two ordinary kids from
Mm.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who
Mm.
met, tried to start a romance, and the war interrupted them. And the ability of my parents in these letters to keep each other's spirits up, hope, hope for the future is really stunning. And it's why I wrote the book.
Yeah. And your dad truly was part of the greatest generation. And your mother is part of that generation as well. Because behind every strong man, there's a strong woman. And she kept him grounded while he was away. And I love the salutations of these letters, like my darling,
Yeah,
and they're beautiful. I've read some of my parents' letters. It'll be like my dearest darling Catherine, and
yeah,
just the salutation is enough to get you crying. It's like I
absolutely.
only knew them as bickering people in the kitchen. I didn't know they loved each other like this at one time, you know. And it's really, really wonderful. And I think it's just so amazing that the average guy from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was such a true American hero that he jumped out of planes, that he was a prisoner of war, that he was insubordinate to the Nazis, and he kept his faith for his country, for his squad
Yeah,
members, and for his crew. I think it's one of the most touching and beautiful stories I've ever heard. I literally am fighting back tears right now because it really is wonderful. I mean, there could be another book, Conversations I Wish I Had with My Dad. And I'm sure
yeah.
reading these letters, you have so many questions and so many things. But thank God they left behind these artifacts. Thank God you've got this side of them that you never knew. Because when you're adults our age, we start appreciating that our parents, dad was 25 when he had me. And, he went off to war at 19 years old and like all of the
Yeah.
great things they did. And today we have kids at, 40 laying on mom's couch playing Nintendo, you know. You see why
I
that was the
This
greatest
generation
generation.
was spectacular. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is I wanted his children, his grandchildren, and his great grandchildren now to know what he did. And the other reason I wrote it was because I did not know his story. And I never got the chance to say to him,
Yeah,
"You were so brave. You were
yeah.
so courageous. You were so willing to sacrifice it all." And I never got to tell him. So I wrote the book for him. And I would just truly want people to know his story. And I know there are a zillion other stories from people's grandparents from this generation. And we can't forget. We just can't forget what they did. And so I wrote
Beautiful.
the
This
book.
should be made into a documentary or a movie, no doubt, because it's such a great story. Like I said,
Yeah,
and this is one of, hundreds of thousands of stories. There were so many, from our generation, all of our dads went to World War II, and their brothers went to
exactly.
World War II, and so forth and so on. And they were heroes, and they came back and led, you know, in many cases, not very distinguished lives. They just went about supporting the family, which is heroic in and of itself, of course, but nothing like jumping out of planes and defying Nazis and being rescued by a group of Americans. It's an amazing story, an amazing book. I'm glad you found this treasure trove. I wish I'd found something like that for my folks. It really is like them talking to you from the grave in many ways. And it's beautiful. And you've done beautiful work on this book. Let's say your dad and mom's name before we leave you today.
My
Your,
dad was First Lieutenant George Albert Hannon, and my mother was Dorothy Snoffer Hannon.
well,
And
we
they were
salute
just,
them.
as I said,
Yeah.
two ordinary kids.
You had two ordinary kids who did extraordinary things,
Yeah.
which is
With
wonderful.
unbelievable courage, hope, resilience, and their behavior. Their behavior, no, they just did it for their country. My dad clearly said that, and
Yeah.
he was a great guy. I miss him.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you do. We all miss our dads. And like I said, you're blessed to have those stories and those artifacts and those letters. The name of the book is Letters from World War II. It's a personal account of Barbara's parents' experiences during the war. After their death, she discovered a box of letters, World War II documents, and a hidden scrapbook, which revealed a story her family had really never known. Through these materials, Barbara pieced together her father's harrowing journey as a B-17 navigator captured by German forces, and she also learned about the enduring love between her parents during those years apart. You'll love this story. It'll remind you of your parents' story, and it'll show you that ordinary people do extraordinary things, and that is so faith-affirming, so love-affirming, and so patriotic. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.